Hey, what's going on, everybody? So we're going to talk about how often when you go on a cut or when you adopt a lifestyle to lose body fat is the main goal, you're going to be going into a caloric deficit. You're going to be eating less than what your body needs. So how do you determine, once your plan is all set in place, how do you determine how often it needs to be changed? And I've noticed that in coaching, some people, they want like changes like daily. It's weird, like daily. It's like, should my macros change? Should my calories change? And then other people are like, they can't stand change. They're like, cool, this is my plan. I am going to rock it till eternity until I reach Goalville. So where is the answer there? How often should you be changing your caloric intake to continue to see results on your nutrition plan? So to dive into this, we're gonna need to get in a little bit of math, okay? So put your math hat on or whatnot, and I'll use myself as our guinea pig, okay? So me, I'm 200 pounds, okay, when I started, and that was 2 weeks ago. My estimated total daily energy expenditure is 3,100. It was actually lower than that. I'm bringing it to 3,100 by doing outside activity. Okay, so my total daily energy expenditure on average for the week is 3,100 calories per day. Rock on. So to maintain the fat loss, not the weight loss, but the fat loss that I want to see, I'm going to need to eat 2,100 calories per day. Now this is very, very aggressive. I don't suggest that anyone do that big a deficit. But for me, that's what I'm choosing to do. All right, so 2,100 calories, that's my golden ticket. And then of course I have my proteins, carbs, fats, distributed appropriately so that I don't just lose a third of a pound of muscle, a third of a pound of weight, a third of a pound of muscle, a third of a pound of water, and a third of a pound of fat. We talked about that in our Weight Watchers episode. I want to lose primarily fat. So my macronutrient distribution fits that caloric intake. Great. So as I'm losing body fat, and you may have had this happen to you, you kind of like, sometimes you just stall, okay? And you're just like, whoa, what is going on? Is that the time to make a change? So let's talk about when would or could potentially be a good time to make a change. Now, the first thing, if you reach a stall mark, where the scale isn't moving in the direction on a grand scheme, like, you know, you're tracking your weekly average, because the scale's going to be all over the place. Okay, so it's been a couple weeks and your scale hasn't changed. All right, so what you're going to want to do is you're first going to want to assess, number one, hey, am I following the plan to a T? If you're not, totally cool. But you don't want to just start making changes just for the point of making changes when you're not following the plan to begin with. Okay, it's kind of like changing the football play when it's telling you to run right, but you've been running left. Well, you don't got to change the play. You got to run the play appropriately. So let's assume that it's been a few weeks. You're running the play flawlessly. Okay, you are right on target. You're hitting the macros. You're being honest with yourself. You're right on target. Okay, so what you're going to want to ask yourself is the next question. Okay, is it time to make a change? Okay, and we're assuming that you're stalling here. So we're going to look at the components of metabolism, all right? So you have your exercise activity thermogenesis. So that's the first thing that I would say is, has anything changed with your activity? All right, let's just assume, nope, my activity has not changed. Okay, rock on. Thermogenic effect of food, okay? So if you've been hitting your plan, then your thermogenic effect of food probably is the same. Okay, so cool, we're good to go. You could say though, if you weren't following macros on the thermogenic effect of food, if you went from like moderate to high protein to low protein, that could have a statistical effect on your total daily energy expenditure. But in this example, we're gonna say that it didn't, okay? Next thing we're gonna need to look at, and this is a big one, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, okay, or your NEAT for short. So if your scale has been stagnant for a couple weeks, you're following flawlessly, your exercise activity hasn't changed, and your thermogenic effect of food obviously hasn't changed. You didn't go from low protein to high protein or high to low. You want to think is NEAT. So NEAT is, do you just feel lethargic? Have you been, hitting the couch when you normally would be walking the dog? Are you parking in aisle A when you would normally park in aisle Z? Okay. NEAT is an objective measurement, but it sometimes could be subjective because a lot of it is subconscious. Okay, like NEAT for me, I tap my foot a lot. Okay, well, when I'm like stupidly lean, I stop doing that. Okay, and NEAT is up to 20. Some scientists say 30% of your total daily energy expenditure. So it's a big chunk. It's a really big chunk. It's about 3 times as what exercise is. Then the next thing that we want to look at is, has your mass changed? The biggest driver of metabolism is your mass. Okay, so that's your height, your weight, your height, your weight, body weight, somewhat of your age. And somewhat of your gender. And really, I think that gender is in there because males tend to be larger massed individuals than females. Okay? So you got your age, weight, height, and gender, and that's what drives your RMR. So here's the deal, is if I started my journey out at 200, like I did, and now I'm walking around, say 4 or 5 weeks later, and I'm walking around at 190, well, my fat loss may plateau a little bit because I'm a smaller massed person, okay? So if I'm looking at my non-exercise activity thermogenesis and say like my total daily energy expenditure has come down a little bit, but none of these other factors were hit, my total daily energy expenditure might be coming down because I now weigh 10 pounds less. I have 10 pounds less mass. If you want to test that theory, just wear like a heart rate monitor and carry a 10-pound of weight on you for 24/7. You know what I mean? You're going to burn a lot more. 10 pounds is a lot. So I would say that it's probably time to make some tweaks. They probably won't need to be huge tweaks. 10 pounds doesn't have a gigantic effect on your resting metabolic rate unless you're like very, very lean. Then it's going to have a pretty effect on like your NEAT, and maybe even your exercise activity thermogenesis because your resting heart rate is so low. Okay, but if you still have some pounds to go, I would still recommend doing some tweaks in your macronutrient distribution. I would say every 7 to 10 pounds, right around there, depending on how large of a massed individual that you were when you started from. Okay, so if you're relatively lean, or say like you're 150 pound or 130 pound female, 5'4", 130 pounds, you lose 10 pounds or 5 pounds even, I would say it's time to put pen to paper and take another look at your macronutrient distribution. Okay, so now let's go on to the final part of this. Does it always have to be? Is that the only way out? Is to cut calories until you reach your desired look? Well, no. As a matter of fact, I think that calories are fairly anabolic, maybe not as anabolic as people tout them to be, but I'm not a big fan of cutting. 1, I like food. 2, that helps you recover. 3, it's more catabolic and more stressful on the body the less your calories get. You don't want to be doing the 1,000 calorie a day deficit. That is not an optimal place to lose fat, particularly if you're like a physique athlete or a performance athlete, or you're interested in maintaining muscle mass and so forth. Okay, so let's go back to the final part of this. So you get to a point where you have stalled, you've been following, you're maybe 7 to 10 pounds down, and it's time to change your macros, time to change your macronutrient distribution, time to potentially change your calories, okay? So do you really need to do that? Well, it depends. If you're willing to manage your NEAT and rule that out, okay, I do it by wearing a Fitbit, okay? So that manages my total daily energy expenditure for me. If you're willing to take on a little bit more cardio, sometimes it doesn't need to be that much. But for me, I don't want to go lower than this 2100. So when I start to stall, I'm going to take the commitment of taking on a little bit more activity. Okay, because I don't want to go lower. I don't want to be on like 1,800 calories. I mean, I'm a 200-pound, 190-pound male. I don't want to be that low. I like food too much. So are you willing to manage your NEAT? Easy way to do that is to track steps on like a Fitbit. That can help manage your NEAT and just be aware of it, which kind of is an oxymoron because NEAT tends to be unconscious movement. Like you're not conscious that you're doing the movement. But if you kind of make yourself a little bit more aware, walk around the house, set a timer, things of that nature. So the second thing is, am I willing to do more activity? Okay, so you're willing to do more activity right here to combat the decrease in RMR from losing weight, from becoming a smaller massed individual. Okay, so those would pretty much be the two questions that you would want to ask. Sometimes the answer is no. You know, sometimes you're like, I don't have time to be adding activity. I don't have time, to be getting off out of my desk and walking around. Okay, well, if that's the case, then we're going to need to go down to the caloric intake, okay, because we need to maintain that deficit. And a lot of times it shouldn't be like a huge, depending on the mass of the individual, it doesn't have to be a gigantic decrease in calories. Sometimes it can just be a little tweak. And, frankly, sometimes it can just be a slight increase. Okay, sometimes a good increase helps us to psychologically get back in the game, bumps our energy up sometimes a little bit, so then we're burning a little bit more calories in the game. So a lot of that is largely individual dependent. All right, so hopefully that answers the question for you. Quick, easy takeaways. I would look at changing up your caloric intake or re-looking at your macros. Again, once your mass has changed. For females, I would go the lower end. I would say 3 to 7 pounds for females, depending on, if they started at 200, 150, where they're starting at. Okay, so the lighter, the leaner you're starting at, the more often you probably need to change that distribution. Okay. And then for males, I would look at the 7 to 10 pound. Again, a lot of that is going to be depending on how large of a male they started with. All right. We've had people go through 16-week contest preparations, people like getting ready to get on shows, getting very lean. And we've had people who just manage stress really well. They manage their NEAT impeccably. They're extremely active. And we didn't have to touch their macros almost at all. 16 weeks, they just fit the formulation perfectly. And that's how we formulate. We take, okay, we need to lose X amount of pounds. We have algorithms that actually take body weight loss into account, take non-exercise activity thermogens into account. So in a perfect world, if we all lived in like a petri dish on our program, you'd be able to follow your distribution right into the show. It rarely works out that way. We've had a few athletes where it did, and they are just like even keel. Their car could blow up, their house can blow up. They just don't. They just don't get like emotional about anything. They're very, very even keel. Okay, so that doesn't happen very often. They also followed their plans flawlessly. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're honest with yourself as far as how you're following as well. All right, rock and roll. If you have any questions or follow-up questions, just post them in the comments. I will get them answered for you. But hopefully you got some good key takeaways. And I think one of the other big takeaways would be this right here, okay? Where your total daily energy expenditure comes from. Okay, where does it come from? And it's largely mass driven. Second to that, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And then, of course, you have your exercise activity thermogenesis. So you want to try to keep, your body's going to fight you the most on the NEAT and the EAT, okay? It's kind of ironic, NEAT and EAT. So it's going to fight you on the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, particularly as you get leaner, it's going to lower that NEAT. If you've ever gotten really lean, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You start to feel like a walking zombie. Okay, and then it's also going to fight you on the exercise activity thermogenesis. So when you go to your workouts, you're just not going to be as vigorous as you were before. And again, those are metabolic adaptations that typically come when you're pretty darn lean. So not something that we need to worry about if we're just trying to get photo shoot ready or sport some abs for a vacation or something along those lines. Cool, rock and roll. Hopefully this was beneficial. If you have questions, post them in the comments.